Hello, Adam.
Hello.
How are you?
Good.
So you actually just returned from the Middle East, including the return of Idan Alexander. The entire release was mediated by the American administration. I would clap a bit louder, but you know. So, can you give us a behind the scenes of how that was? Because there's no precedent to that of even Israelis being at that moment when parents meet their child. It's always, you were actually there in the room. You weren't, an officer or whatever. You were representing the American government.
It's an unbelievable moment. It was an unbelievable moment on Sunday. My wife and I flew with Yael over on the plane on El. So the whole time we were sitting, she couldn't sleep. So it was exciting, nerve-wracking. We landed, and we were picked up by an IDF helicopter to take us over to the site. And then we watched pretty much real time. We were waiting for Steve Witkoff to come, which was timed kind of exactly with Idan coming into the Red Cross, coming in. And so I would say one thing about Israeli media, as you know, more than American, is it's very real time.
Yeah, very quickly.
Very quick.
Yeah.
And so this was all streaming. And I remember we were watching when the helicopter landed. We saw it on our TV with Adi and Yael. And we saw Steve come down and then Steve walk in like 1 second later. So it's really real time. It's good media. It's impressive.
Yeah.
And then that first phone call was unbelievable. Hearing that. Also, it was right on Mother's Day when we went over. So the whole thing had a lot of meaning. And it had a lot of meaning for me, for Steve, and for everybody there, of course.
Definitely.
You started attempting to release Idan Alexander, right, I think, after the administration took office back then in January. You opened a back channel with Hamas. You got criticized on it from many Israelis. Do you think it was the right idea back then? And now I want to ask you, is there some kind of negotiations attempt via Hamas directly to reach any new hostage deal?
So one, I'd say my role, as you may imagine, is focused on hostages around the world. You may imagine the other side of that are generally not good people if they're taking hostages. And so for me, I think of it as my job to engage with people that, in general, are not good people. And in this particular case, I take a lot of inspiration from our president now, from President Trump, in that one thing that he's shown, thank you. One thing that President Trump has shown is that he's willing at any time to engage. And there's not, what I find is any direct engagement, any engagement is not weakness. It does not mean you accept something or you let people off the hook. Quite frankly, what it means is speediness in communication. And so from that perspective, there was some interest there, and we thought we could see if we could speed things up. Now, in that particular case, it didn't work. We walked away. But then things come around. Then Steve tried, and it wasn't right. And now I think it's getting closer and closer to being the right time to make a deal here. So I guess short and long, if Hamas wants to come forward and make a very legitimate offer that they're willing to stand by and release hostages, we're always willing to listen to that.
So after a few days in Doha, you were the last week with the negotiations team. We're in the midst of a new attempt. How close would you say are we to a new hostage deal?
I'm not going to speak on things that, first of all, some that I was part of, some that I wasn't part of, so I don't want to overspeak, and I think a lot of those things are fluid and confidential. So let me just speak generally. in this area, which is I do think we're closer than we ever were. And part of that is because of movement that the IDF and Israel did on the ground. And so that does, it strengthens our hand.
So as opposed to France, the UK, and what was the other country?
Canada.
Canada, who criticized Israel today for the ground operation, the United States supports it?
The United States has always been a fervent supporter of Israel.
That's true.
And I think we always think about how you balance various aspects. But if I were a European country, I'd be particularly sensitive to how I criticize Israel.
Okay.
Zvika, if you want.
Okay.
Sorry. This has to be said sometimes.
Definitely. So we had a lot of discussions throughout the day, and many people, including people in the audience or those in Israel, some people see the Trump visit to the Middle East last week as something that Israel kind of lost an opportunity on. Being, Trump did not visit Israel. He did mention Israel on a number of occasions. Happy to hear your take on that. And you were in part of those meetings.
Yeah, I think a couple things to think about with respect to it, which is every foreign visit obviously is not a referendum on a particular country one way or the other. Trump obviously has engaged with Bibi. It was his first visit.
Right.
I think Bibi's been 3 times.
Twice, I think.
There may have been a quick return back on the tariff side, but maybe it's 2. But a lot of interaction, and certainly during those visits, a good portion of those visits was discussing the hostage situation broadly, as well as the perspective of joining the Abraham Accords. And so I think Israel was close at mind in those, independent of whether there was another stop, et cetera.
But should Israel feel it's a bit downgraded when it comes to other U.S. allies in the region after this visit?
No, I don't think so at all.
Let me ask you personally about Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Trump relations. Would you say they're good, bad? Would you say there are divisions between the two? How would you describe the relations these days?
Because I'll add to that, there was different, statements coming out, and also the president himself basically giving the credit for the release of Idan Alexander to the United States, and only later on was Prime Minister Netanyahu mentioned.
Yeah, look, I think that's specific to various situations one way or the other. The way I think about President Trump, both in 45, in between, during President Biden and now, is I don't think the support's ever wavered. He happens to be a very consistent person. He likes when there's consistency on the other side, and I don't think there's ever been a change in support for Israel, Israeli state, the Jewish people broadly. You see everything we're doing, anti-Semitism. It's funny because when I walked up here, I saw all the Palestinian demonstrations, and what I feel like when I come in is it used to bother me a lot, and then I'm like, well, we won. So I'm not as bothered.
But there have been reports, and obviously reports without people's name on them, saying
I'll
that...
add to figure, for example, the nuclear agreement. There's real fear in Israel about deal. Your administration is in these days negotiation with Iran.
And also that Trump is losing patience with Netanyahu.
Yep. Well, those are two very, very different things, obviously. So let me start on the deal side, which is, again, I think the president is always open to make a deal, but the reality is it has to be the right deal. And I think he's been very clear. Look, the one thing I'll say is President Trump is very clear and consistent in what he says. And so he is not okay with the Iranians having and enriching uranium at all. He said it. Steve Witkoff has said it. And so I think they've been consistent in that area. And I think, look, at the end of the day, despite what some people think his reputation is, he is a peacemaker. We left the administration and things were very settled. We came in now a little bit over 100 days ago, and there's a lot of problems, and the goal in those is to settle them, not to escalate if it's not necessary. So I think the view, again, the peace through strength view is you achieve that through strength. You can't be afraid to take action. It's obviously an action-driven administration. So you can't be afraid to take action, but if you don't have to, if you're not forced, that's not your fallback one way or the other. And so that's what I think you're seeing there. Your other question about Bibi.
With regards to reports saying that Trump is losing his patience with Netanyahu.
I think that Trump would love to be in a situation where these hostages are home. So I think that's a huge objective. That doesn't mean that Israel's security needs to be compromised. They're two very different things. While they're related, because one could do it the wrong way, there are plenty of ways that we can think of to make sure that Israel is always strong, its security is never compromised, and we push towards something that gets people home.
What's the main force holding back a deal?
I think the main force holding back a deal is Hamas.
Okay.
Do you see any opportunity or any options that the U.S. will give them guarantees that will leave them in Gaza, like the demanded end?
Well, I mean, here's what's clear. I think even they know at this point there's not an immediate political future. It would be crazy, right? You can't have people that go in and murder people come over. There's no equation that has that. I think people need to accept that. And look, the reality is, if I were Hamas, I would have unilaterally released people a long time ago. There's a reason why Hamas isn't a state or hasn't gotten there, because they make not so great decisions all the time, which has led them to this place, because it obviously is not working out for what they want. And so I wouldn't always assume that they make the best decisions to further their cause. And so eventually they have to come along to that view. And I think, again, it's through strength we show them that, and consistency. I will say, look, what we've done, there's certain terms that you had a while back. Those terms have gotten tighter and tighter. Because the reality is they need to understand the longer they wait, there's a cost. I mean, to be very clear, there's not one day that goes by that I don't think about the cost of people there, of Matan, I talked to Adon about, there is a everyday cost. And Hamas needs to feel that everyday cost.
Are you optimistic?
This is, you're always, I'm cautiously optimistic, I think that as time goes on, we have increased in strength of something happening. Hamas knows now, or they are more and more recognizing over time what needs to be done, and I think the odds go up, put it that way.
Okay.
I have a question about another Israeli hostage who is held in Iraq. A different story, Elizabeth Tsurkov, which I know you have been dealing for months. She was kidnapped by Kata'ib Hezbollah back then. Tell us what the status of maybe bringing her back to Israel, and how much do you think is the Iraqi government doing enough to bring her back?
I think that the Iraqi government has, and I have done some pushing there personally, as you may notice. I think they were doing clearly not enough. I think they've stepped up efforts, and I think the more that we, the United States, combined with Israel, make Kata'ib Hezbollah understand that what they see now, because they're the only one that's not in a world of hurt on the extremist side right now. That attention is going to turn eventually, and I think it is in their best interest to release her now. Not to wait, because I think what you're going to see if they wait is they're going to see the same thing that Hamas saw, the same thing that Hezbollah saw. And so when you have a name like militant Hezbollah, I wouldn't expect much better than any of those groups. So I think the best thing that they can do right now is take the action and release her immediately.
Perfect. Adam Boehler, thank you so much. You're representing the Trump administration at this conference. So first of all, thank you for what you've been doing and the administration has been doing for the hostages, for Israel. And we all hope and pray that you succeed.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.